Friends, dear subscribers, today I'm bringing you a truly spectacular video. We're going to talk about this gambit here that we've surely seen on the channel. Look, e4, e5, d4, that is, after the double king's pawn that you'll play many times, play d4, okay? But we're going to see a fairly new variation and explain it in a slightly different way that I think you'll like much more. You'll enjoy the video much more and understand it better, so you can play it in your own games. So, if you like this new explanation format, leave a like so I know that you enjoyed it. Alright, here, look. After this gambit here, e4, e5, d4, the only correct move is to capture here. Why? I'll explain it simply. First, let's see what happens if they don't defend this pawn. It'd be silly because by capturing we'd gain too much space, though even here they could capture, we could keep attacking this knight, and it'd be a waste of time for our opponent. And if they defend it, for example with a pawn, we could capture and then trade queens, okay? And then we'd have the castle while our opponent wouldn't have it. So defending with the pawn wouldn't work for them either. I won't even mention this one because it would be even worse. Look, pawn takes pawn, and we'd probably end up giving checkmate with the queen. Check, they'd have to cover, and then we'd capture here and take the rook. Obviously, I'm not even considering this one, okay? Alright, so what happens if they defend with the knight? Well, here we could probably advance and we'd be much better off. What do I mean by all this? That we're going to focus on what happens when they capture the pawn, which is the only good move for black. The logical move that we've seen on the channel several times is to capture this pawn with the queen. However, in this video, we'll see what happens playing knight f3, which is a move that I love. And you'll see that by playing this gambit, we're going to get a tremendous initiative. That's why I'm bringing it to the channel, right? I liked it very much. Knight f3, we attack this pawn. It's fine if they defend it with a knight. Why? Because we have two pieces attacking, while they only have one. Let's assume here that they trade. We'll see whether they trade or not, okay? If they don't trade, we'll double pawns, but normally they'll trade this knight, because otherwise they'll be at a disadvantage in terms of pawn structure, okay? So the normal thing would be to always reach this position here. We're going to see this base position, okay? We'll see and study it with real games, because I think it's much more interesting than just playing engine moves, right? If we only play engine moves, it's not real. And then when we play in online games or in a tournament, well, the same thing won't happen to us, right? Let's see what happens first if they play this move, knight f6. A very strange move, because we can already kick this knight out directly with e5. However, we can see that knight f6 here would seem like a supernormal move, since this bishop can't develop, this bishop could only go to these two squares, so it could also be normal to bring out this knight. First, I'll show you how to punish it and how it was punished in this game, because it's very simple and very easy to understand, okay? First, logically, we must kick out this knight, and here's why this move is so good. We'll notice that this knight right now only has one available square. Why? If it comes here, we take it with the queen, just like if it comes here, and also if it comes here. However, it could also move here, but the knight would be lost after the move g4. So if they play knight f6 here, you play e5, and they come with the knight here, you just play g4, and you've won this knight that has no squares. So we conclude that after e5, the only possible move is to retreat the knight back. Notice that this already looks very bad for the black pieces. However, they aren't necessarily lost. We're equal in material. They've simply lost two tempos that we must take advantage of. We develop this knight. My advice is to develop the knight on c3 first. That's how it happened in the game as well. And notice that the opponent now has several options. We'll see several, obviously, but let's start with a logical one, developing this bishop, since if he develops this knight first, this bishop has no way out. And if he develops it here, notice that he would lose it. And if he develops it here, we just open up here and he wouldn't be able to castle anymore. To make sure you understand, it's best to develop this bishop first. The queen and pawn block these squares, so bishop e7 is the only square. Notice that these are all very logical moves, which is why this player played bishop e7. With the white pieces, we're going to play, bishop d3. This bishop, why is it placed on d3 and not on c4 or here? Well, it's placed on d3 because it already puts x-ray pressure on this point here. You know that when the king castles, this will directly be the weakest point in the position. So a bishop on d3 will be staring intently at this point right here. The goal of the video is for you to see how white players play this gambit, so you can find the ideas and replicate them in your games. The player with the black pieces, notice he doesn't have many options. If I tell you to think of a move, I'm sure almost all of you think of d6. Why? Because he must develop this bishop somehow, and this move already tries to put a little pressure on this pawn to eliminate this pawn that bothers him so much. However, it's not the best move. Maybe it would be a bit better to come out here, but, well, they have to do something, because if he comes out here, this pawn will stay here forever, and this knight won't be able to get out. So, well, d6 might not be the best move, but it's not the worst either, right? They're very similar. It's the one you'll most likely encounter, surely, d6. How should you react if they try to capture this pawn? Well, we can simply reinforce it with the other bishop, bishop f4. Notice how we develop the pieces while the opponent stays locked in behind. That's the idea. What happens if they capture this pawn? Which is logical. Why? Because if not, we're going to capture it ourselves and leave them with an isolated pawn. Alright, so when they capture us here, notice that we have several options. Our queen is under attack. We must capture. What should we do? Well, the correct answer would be to capture this pawn with the queen. That's what the player with the white pieces did. Now we're attacking this pawn, which probably doesn't matter much to the black pieces, because right now their development matters much more than a single pawn. So, with very good judgment, the black pieces played knight f6, developing their knight. Now, here we have to make a decision, castle long or castle short. I like it much more, just like the player with the white pieces, to castle long, because that way we place a rook directly on one of the two open files. And not only that, but the queen's file. Look, the two open files, which ones are they? The D file and the EE file. By castling short, the rook ends up on the F file and does nothing. By castling long, notice that the rook ends up on the D file directly on the open file and attacking the queen much better, without a doubt. Black can now castle. And now we must continue with the attack. Notice that here they're already lost. If they castle, bishop takes would simply follow and we'd win the queen. See? Because of the discovered attack, thanks to the rook. So they can't castle. But the thing is, if they don't castle, the consequences are exactly the same. They can't do anything at all. Because, for example, let's suppose they play any move. This one here. Then the discovered attack would come through here, check, and we take the queen too. So you'll tell me, well, chess teacher, but what happens if here, instead of castling, instead of bringing out the bishop, they block here? Notice it's well blocked, right? This file's blocked, this one's blocked, this check is blocked. Nothing at all can be done here anymore. Well, all right, here we'd simply continue with the idea of bringing the rooks to the center, and the advantage is massive. We have these two rooks attacking the center. They could never castle because they'd lose the bishop. Notice that thanks to the rook and the queen, this bishop would be left completely unprotected. So what happens? That now there's no way out of here for the black pieces. So we should simply keep attacking. No matter what move they make, let's suppose they play, I don't know, rook c8. They do nothing and try to protect themselves back here. Well, we could simply do, for example, look, bishop f5, right? Sorry, bishop c4, I don't even know how to talk, and we're putting pressure here since they're not going to castle. We change the bishop's starting point, open up the rooks, and this position is a total steal. We could enter with the knight, no matter how much they exchange. We also enter through here, even with the rook, and the position is completely winning for the white pieces. Very well, chess teacher. So we've seen that if they play knight f6 against us, the position was super comfortable to play for the white pieces, and we could win quite easily. However, we've already seen directly that knight f6 was silly, because we play e5 and we punish it really hard. But what if they play with a bit more thought, and instead of knight f6, they play d6, specifically to prevent this pawn advance, right? Well, this makes a whole lot more sense, all right? But as I was just explaining to you, there are games with all kinds of moves. So if they make a move that's bad on the face of it, but you don't know how to capitalize on it, it doesn't help you at all that they made a bad move. So now you know how to capitalize. If they play knight f6, let's see what happens if when you play this great gambit, they play d6, because this is very interesting. And we're going to follow along with a real game as well, because it's much more effective, right? Notice that, as I always tell you, we're going to follow our plan. Don't just memorize the moves, memorize the plan. knight c3, just like we did in the previous version. Notice that first we kicked out the knight, but this time we don't have to kick out the knight. So it's much better for us, honestly, to develop the pieces first. Now they can play knight f6. It makes much more sense since they have this pawn protecting the e5 square. We keep developing. We don't care. Bishop e2. Notice that the good thing about this opening or gambit, first it's a gambit. Yes, we give away a pawn, but we get it back. That is, we're not down any material. So we're in no hurry to attack so very hard. All we have to do is place our pieces in the correct way to be able to attack in the long term. For example, bishop e2 now makes a lot of sense. Bishop d3 would also be possible, without a doubt, but now this pawn is blocking a bit, right? That's why I placed it first on e2, and the player with the white pieces did too. How does the game go? Bishop e7. Notice that now the black pieces can develop in a much better way. Without a doubt, it has nothing to do with the first part of the video, where black made life too complicated for themselves. First by developing this knight, since they let us place this pawn here, which was a headache for the opponents. Now notice that with bishop e7, they develop much better. We castle short. Now there's no need to castle long, there aren't as many open files, and this way we go much faster. Short castle, also on the part of the black pieces. And now, well, we develop the piece we have left again in the same place. Notice it's developed exactly the same. The only difference is right here. Why? Because here it's blocked and here it wasn't. And the long castle, instead of long, we've done it short. Why? Because now it wasn't necessary to place this rook here first, but we've prioritized castling a bit faster and in a safer way, okay? I'm explaining it so you understand it well. For example, we don't care about rook 8, they could also move the bishop. It would be the same, right? Notice that this bishop can't do much here or here either because it can't move this way. Very well, so rook 8 is what was played in the game, and notice that if we follow the plan, you'll be able to play this gambit in a super precise way, because you already know that this rook is going to end up here. So you're surely going to make the correct moves. As I told you, if they had moved the bishop first, it would have been the same, right? Notice that now they move the bishop. Bishop e6, there is no better square for the bishop. At least here it's well protected. So you'll ask me, chess teacher, how should we attack here? This is looking very complicated. Well, yes, now what we're going to do is pull back this bishop, and you'll see that this move is very important. First, because whenever you have an unprotected piece on the board, it's better to have it protected. So it's on the same diagonal, but now protected by two pieces. So you no longer have any unprotected pieces because the bishop is protected by the knight. So look. Queen d7, the black pieces are trying to connect the rooks with good judgment. And now, seeing that they're aiming at this point here with the bishop, knight, and also with x-rays from the queen, the white pieces play h3, which makes a lot of sense. Notice that you can really tell it's a real game. If we were making engine moves, it probably would have made a super strong attacking move. A human prefers to play h3 to avoid these kinds of threats, and at some point be able to shield this bishop if it's threatened around here, for example, right? So, h3, a move that has a lot of logic. As I said, while you watch these videos, think for yourselves how you would play, what ideas you see, and see if they match those of the white pieces, okay? Notice that here, the black pieces play the remaining rook they had on a8, placing it on d8, undoubtedly much better positioned and attacking the queen. And it seems impossible to attack through here. How exactly can the white pieces attack? Now, by moving this rook, they leave this pawn exposed. And I ask you, would it be a good idea to capture this pawn? Or maybe later, when the rook came back here, it would attack our queen, and upon retreating it, they'd attack this point with rook and bishop, making it much worse? Well, the correct answer is yes. In this case, you can capture this pawn. They can win it back, but they're gonna have problems, okay? And the player with the white pieces thought it was a good idea to capture this pawn, and I think so too. Look, they attack the queen, it's fine, because they retreat it. In this case, they don't retreat it here, but a bit further away, because behind the pawn, it's much safer. Notice that a queen behind a pawn is very safe, as the knight would drive it away from these two squares protected by the pawn. Very well, now notice they've done this, right? They place the rook behind so that when it moves away, they can recover this pawn. Very well, this is starting to get dangerous. Even though it seems we can't capture this bishop because they have the rook, and in fact we shouldn't, you should always know that when a bishop captures a side pawn, you have this b3 move available to prevent the bishop from returning. So for now, we don't have an extra piece, but it's true that this bishop will be a bit tucked away back here, and surely with a move like rook a1, this bishop will end up being lost. Well, let's not get ahead of ourselves. But anyway, just so you know, when a bishop captures a side pawn, b3 is usually the best option every time. Here, the black pieces can't do anything with this bishop, so they play bishop f8, a move that makes a lot of sense. Why? Because it opens up the file for the rook. A rook that points directly at where the queen is and at the weak point of the position, which is the d4 point. It points with the knight, it also points with the rook. Maybe in the future it can also point with the queen. So bishop f8 is a move that makes a lot of sense. This bishop here does absolutely nothing. It just gets in the way of the rook. So here it protects the castling and clears the way for the rook. And then here the white pieces make a move that the black pieces can already resign to. If you want to pause the video to try and find it, you can do that, okay? I'm going to say it next. The good move is e5. This move is spectacular. Why? Let's see it. It attacks the knight, although it doesn't exactly attack the knight directly, because if we captured it, we would lose the queen, right? But anyway, the threat is there. What happens? That they can't capture this pawn because with the rook, notice the importance of placing the rook on open files, and especially on files where the queen is. Now, black has done very well to place this rook here because it can't be captured since the queen is there. And white has done very well to place this rook here because it can't be captured because the queen is there. So how can the black pieces continue? Well, they tried to escape with the queen over there. Notice that they don't lose the knight. It seems like they do, but they don't lose the knight because we would lose the queen. But nevertheless, this is already useless because look at what the white pieces did. They played bishop g5, and effectively now this queen can move, but we would capture the rook. And now in the future, we could capture this knight. Notice how the game continues. The black pieces tried to escape. Why? Because after the exchange of bishop for rook, they said, well, I'll move the knight and you won't eat it anymore, and I've only lost quality. What does it mean to lose quality? Losing quality means losing a rook for a minor piece. It's serious, but it's not that serious, okay? They've simply lost a rook for a knight. It's not that serious. That's what the black pieces thought. But nevertheless, notice that now, thanks to this bishop being here, we could try to recover it. What the white pieces thought is that, here they had a wonderful tactical blow, okay? Which was the following. Notice, sorry, here the exchange of queens had taken place. There it is. The tactical blow was the following. I capture here. Why, if it was better to place the rook to recover this bishop? Well, to divert this rook from the back rank. And notice that this move simply gives the victory to the white pieces and makes the black pieces resign. Why? Because this knight is totally stuck here. It can't come out here because the pawn is there, and here either, and it can't be defended with anything. That's why here they not only have an extra quality, but now they're going to recover this piece. Whatever the opponent does, they would simply recover the knight. And notice, let's do the count. 2 rooks against 1 and 1 piece against 1. So white is left with an extra rook. Look at that way at present. It's very important that you understand what happens if they don't exchange this knight for you, okay? When this position is here and we capture this pawn, they don't trade this knight here, which is what we're seeing right now in the video. Well, first, I'll explain a move you should know, and then to finish up, I'll explain how to win easily if they don't capture here, okay? First, if they do capture, I'll explain this thing you need to know. What happens if they play knight to e7? It's very important that you know it because it looks like a stupid move, but it's very good. Why? Because they can go to c6 directly to attack our queen, and all the problems the black pieces had with not being able to move this bishop or this knight, they gain initiative, and now they're doing great. So we already know that here you punish quickly. We've seen how to win if they play d6 to prepare knight to f6. But what happens if they play knight to e7, chess teacher? Because it's a very, very interesting move, as I've just seen. Well then, let's develop our pieces in the normal, standard way. For example, bishop to c4. Why bishop to c4? Well, because now notice that this point becomes very weak. You don't need to replicate exactly what's done in these games, obviously, but you have to apply logic. The bishop here would be blocked by the pawn. And right now, this looks like a very interesting move, right? Why? Because it's attacking the f7 point, which is only defended by the king, and it looks like they won't be able to castle for a few moves, because to develop this bishop, they must first move this knight, then the bishop, and then castle. That's why it's a good idea to place the bishop directly on c4 to target this f7 point. Why did they put the knight here? Obviously, to move the knight to c6 and attack our queen. And here we're going to take advantage of why we place the bishop on c4. Watch. When our opponent plays bishop to knight to e7, we already know they want to do knight to c6. So why did we play bishop to c4 as well? Well, for what I told you before, we want to place the queen here when they attack us, and notice we're going to create a spectacular battery directly on the f7 point. That's why you must know how to take advantage of weaknesses. And that's why this gambit, without giving away material, is so good because it has tremendous initiative. We're attacking this point directly. There are a few ways to defend it. With the knight, it's impossible because it would be here and here, it can't go here, and here it would be captured. With the bishop, they can't because it can't get out. So the only way is with the queen. It doesn't matter if it's to e7 or f6. Either way is fine. e7 is worse as it leaves this bishop with no way out. So let's see if they play queen to f6, the most logical move. Well then, notice that we can already enter with a lot of force with the other bishop. Notice I'm explaining how to play with a lot of initiative no matter what the black pieces do, right? With this gambit, that's why if you save this video, it'll be very, very helpful for you to study it thoroughly and be able to play it in your games. This queen can only go to one place, right? It can come here. It seems the others aren't as good. And now we simply castle kingside. This is what happened in the game. d6 to be able to develop this bishop, and notice that here they already launch with f4. A typical attack plan. Here, notice that our ideas are to advance these pawns to open the rook file and keep putting pressure on the f7 point. You're going to see that it'll be key no matter what your rivals do. When they play this plan of knight e7, knight c6, it'll be key to castle short and advance these pawns to win this attack on the f7 point. You'll see, because it's going to be a lot of fun. Bishop e7, they're trying to trade these bishops with us. It makes a lot of sense because that way they can castle, and the sooner they castle, the sooner they have this point defended. However, we don't want to give them any time, so boom, we trade right here. They can capture with the knight and it attacks our queen, and we can pull this queen back to several different locations. I'm going to pull it back here. Queen d5 is what happened in the game. A good location. Why? Because the opponent's bishop is on the light squares. We place it on the dark squares so they can't attack it. And whenever they want to attack with the knight, we can come back here, right? Very well, we place it on d5, bishop e6 to develop, which caused a serious mistake. Notice that this was a miscalculation on the opponent's part, because as much as they're threatening this bishop trade now, we have this move available here, which is what happened in the game. It's a fork, and many of you will say, yeah, but they can capture here first. Obviously not, because as much as they attack the rook, we'd capture the queen, which is much better than a rook, right? So here, the only option black has is to try to trade a minor piece, okay? Either the bishop or the knight for these two pawns. In this case, in the game, they traded it with the bishop. Notice it doesn't seem that serious, because now after the trades, it's true that black has lost a minor piece, but they've recovered two pawns and even gained the initiative. However, here they're already totally lost because white gave check with the queen. This king has to move or, if not, defend with the knight, which seems better. However, look, thanks to the rook and the bishop, we'd be winning the game here. The black pieces resigned after the move bishop takes f7, attacking the queen and attacking the king. So when the king moves, the queen would simply be captured, and it's won with great ease. This part of the video is super important, but don't worry, because it's super simple to understand. I'll explain it quickly, and it's what I mentioned to you before, right? We play the gambit that we're seeing in this movie, I was going to say. In this video, they capture here because it's the only good one, we've seen it. Knight f3, attacking this knight. Knight c6. But what if when capturing this pawn, they don't capture our knight? Because so far, we've only seen what happens if they capture this knight. And if they don't capture it, well, simply goodbye to the video, because it's no longer of any use to us, right? For example, in this game, knight f6 was played, a very logical move. Since it attacks this pawn, it would no longer be possible to advance because we'd lose it. So now these two knights control very well. How should we play, chess teacher, if they play this directly? For example, knight f6, ignoring the threat of a knight trade. Well, very well. Obviously, you must capture this knight. If they capture with the king's pawn, up queens. Very simple. You trade queens and you win the castling. Very easy. But the good one is to capture with the bishop's pawn. In this case, the knight's pawn towards the bishop's pawn. So now you have the move e5 available. That's why we've managed to eliminate the knight on c6. This knight, where can it go? It has solid squares. For example, c4 is definitely best. Sorry, d5 is best. We're playing c4 now. I was thinking ahead. This knight, where can it go? Well, look, not here, not here, not here, not here. Here, yes, but it could be kicked out quickly. So the most logical thing is for it to go here on b6 on a very solid square. In the future, it can attack this pawn. If at some point we advance, it could relocate here in a super solid way. That's why knight b6 seems like a super good move. How should we continue? By developing our pieces. For example, bishop e3, touching the knight, which we don't intend to capture, but rather to put on pressure. If they give us a check, how do we cover? Through here or through here? Well, through here they'd leave us with these two isolated and doubled pawns that would bother us a lot. That's why it's much preferable to place the knight on d2, without a doubt, and kick this bishop out later. If they capture us, thank you, we capture with the queen and we simply stay with the bishop pair, and with much better development. Short castle for the black pieces. Notice that we're basing this on real games to see how this gambit really works in real games. Now, bishop d3. As we've seen, this bishop is great because this pawn is gone. With the pawn there, the bishop could never reach d3, but since it's advanced, the bishop always comes out to this square. Why? Because it gives it a direct free path to attack the opponent's castle. Very logical. Rook e8, an always useful move to attack this pawn of ours. And notice that now we must evaluate the same thing we always evaluate. Is it necessary to defend this calm? Well, no. Short castle. Why? Because if they capture this pawn, which is what happened in the game, we gain initiative. Initiative is much more important than a pawn most of the time. So notice that we're castling and gaining an initiative over the rook that has to recover now at home. It has to retreat, and we have a much better development than the opponent. For example, we can continue with our initiative queen c2, and we attack the h7 point. They have to defend, and there's only one possible move, g6. Very well, now they defend, but how can we continue? Well, for example, by attacking this knight. And what's the idea of trapping this knight? Well, the idea, look, is that we want to trap this bishop. This bishop can go back now, but if we play this move here, it's true the knight can retreat, but this bishop is already totally lost. A 3 and this bishop can't go anywhere anymore. It can come here, but whenever we want, we can play b4, and this bishop is already won. That's why we've won the bishop. Can we play this one directly? Yes, but maybe it wouldn't be the best because first they capture here, then they'd win another pawn. Look, huh? Think that they already have an extra pawn, the one we gave away here they'd win another, and here we're left with some very bad pawns. So maybe better, before playing b4 directly, we're going to win this bishop whenever we want. Look, I move the bishop, attack the queen, this queen has to retreat, she can't, she has to move the knight to block, and now we simply capture this bishop. And we have two options, b4 would be good, but queen a4 would be better. Much better because we don't double pawns and this bishop can't go anywhere. Notice that here is the bishop and the knight, so this bishop would be lost. And this is where the black pieces resigned. Hope you like this gambit. I hope you understood this explanation well. It was too fast, I know, but you can watch the video as many times as needed. Save it. Let me know in the comments what you thought. Leave a like, and I'll see you in the next one, friends. Goodbye.